It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning. I had my coffee in hand, the sun was just creeping over the rooftops, and the only sound I expected to hear was the chirping of birds. But instead I was met with the sound of metal snapping. At first I thought it was construction work from a few streets over. But the sound was too close, too sharp, like a chain being broken. I stepped out onto my porch and froze. There she was, Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA. Short, angry, and moving like she was on a mission. She had a pair of bolt cutters in her hands and she was crouched right in front of my garage door. My garage. My lock. For a second I thought maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe I was seeing things. But no, Karen was right there, cutting through the heavy-duty padlock I'd put on my garage just the week before. I could actually hear the snap echo down the driveway. She didn't even flinch. She didn't even look around to see if anyone was watching. She just pushed the garage door open and walked inside like she owned the place. I set my coffee down and stepped closer. Hey, what do you think you're doing? She looked up at me with this smug little smile. You were warned. Multiple times. That Jeep doesn't belong here. The HOA voted to have it removed. Removed? This was my property. My garage. My Jeep. Now here's the thing, this wasn't just any Jeep. It wasn't some random off-road toy I'd picked up for weekend adventures. This was an official federal police task force vehicle. I drove it as part of my work. And yeah, it didn't exactly look like a squad car. It looked like a regular Jeep, but it had specialized modifications and clearance plates. I wasn't even allowed to park it just anywhere. I had to stay secure. Which is exactly why it was locked up in my garage. But Karen had been complaining about it for weeks. First, she claimed it was too big and an eyesore. Then she said it counted as a commercial vehicle, which the HOA rules didn't allow in residential driveways. I tried to explain. I even showed her the documentation proving it was an official federal vehicle. She waved me off like I was making it up. And now, apparently, she'd decided to take matters into her own hands. I moved toward the garage, but she stepped right in front of me. You can't go in there. We've already called a tow truck. It's being impounded. Impounded? By who? The HOA doesn't have that kind of power. I told her to step aside. She crossed her arms. You had your chance to comply. Now you'll face the consequences. The boldness in her voice, it was unreal. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even second-guessing herself. She was completely sure she was right. That's when I noticed movement behind her. A man in a neon vest, probably the tow truck driver, was walking up the driveway. He looked uncomfortable, glancing between me and Karen. I could see in his eyes that he knew something wasn't right. But Karen was in full control mode. She marched over to him and pointed toward the garage. That's the one. Get it hooked up and out of here. I stepped between them. If you even touch that Jeep, you're going to have a much bigger problem than the HOA. Karen laughed. Actually laughed. Oh please. You think you can scare me with your little threats? I didn't bother arguing. I knew exactly what was about to happen. And deep down I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. No idea that by cutting my lock, she wasn't just committing a petty neighborhood crime. She was interfering with federal property. She wasn't stealing from a neighbor. She was stealing from the United States government. The kind of people I work with, they don't knock on your door and ask politely for their stuff back. When something is taken, they send agents. With badges. With warrants. And with the authority to make sure that mistake never happens again. But Karen? She just kept barking orders at the tow truck driver, telling him to hurry up before I called the police. She didn't know I wouldn't have to call anyone. The police were already my people. And as I stood there, watching her wave her arms and try to look powerful, I couldn't help but wonder, how long would it take before reality came crashing down on her? Karen kept talking like she was narrating her own TV drama, but I could see the cracks in her confidence. The tow truck driver kept glancing at me, then at the Jeep, like he was silently begging me to tell him what to do. I didn't say much. I just stood there with my phone in hand, ready to make one call. Not to the local police. Not to the HOA. To my task force supervisor. Karen noticed the phone and smirked. Go ahead, call your little buddies. This Jeep is gone today whether you like it or not. I hit one button, put the phone to my ear and calmly said, yeah, I'm gonna need a unit here. Somebody just cut the lock on the task force Jeep. Her smirk faded. She blinked twice like she wasn't sure she'd heard me right. Task force? What task force? I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. She'd find out soon enough. The tow truck driver froze halfway into hooking the Jeep. Wait, this is a police vehicle? he asked quietly. I nodded. Federal. His hands dropped from the chain like they'd suddenly turned to stone. He stepped back fast. Yeah, I'm out. I'm not touching this. Karen spun on him. What do you mean you're out? You're being paid to tow it. He shook his head. Lady, I'm not getting tangled up in stealing a federal vehicle. I don't care what you're paying me. I could see her getting red in the face. It's not federal. He's lying. It's just his personal Jeep. The driver looked between us, then back at the Jeep. Those plates say otherwise. Karen glanced at the plates, her eyes narrowing like she was trying to figure out if they were real. I could see her brain working overtime, scrambling for a way to explain it away. Before she could come up with something, I heard the sound of engines, 2 black SUVs rolling down the street, fast but controlled. They pulled right up to my driveway, and the second they stopped, 4 agents stepped out. No hesitation. No small talk. Just the presence of people who know exactly what they're doing. Karen's voice cracked a little. Who are they? I didn't bother answering. The lead agent flashed his badge at me and nodded. We got your call. Where's the suspect? I tilted my head toward Karen. She laughed nervously. Suspect? I'm not a suspect. I'm the HOA president. This is a civil matter. The agent looked at her like she just claimed the moon was made of cheese. Ma'am, you cut the lock to access and remove a federal vehicle. That's not a civil matter. That's a felony. Karen's mouth fell open. She actually tried to argue. But it's ugly. It's in violation of HOA rules. We voted. The agent held up a hand. Ma'am, you need to stop talking. She didn't. She kept going, faster now, her words tumbling over each other. I have authority here. I can have vehicles removed if they're not in compliance. It's in the bylaws. The agent stepped closer. The HOA doesn't have authority over federal property. You've committed theft, and you used tools to break into a secure area. You need to step back and put your hands where I can see them. That was the moment her eyes went wide. Reality was starting to sink in, but it was too late. 2 agents moved in beside her, guiding her away from the Jeep. She started sputtering, half protests, half disbelief. This is crazy. You can't arrest me. I was protecting the neighborhood. One of the agents glanced at me. We'll take it from here. I watched as they walked her toward the SUVs. The tow truck driver stood frozen in place, his jaw hanging open. Man, he muttered, I almost just lost my whole career today. The agent secured the Jeep, checked it over, and confirmed nothing had been damaged. One of them handed me back the cut lock like it was evidence. We'll log this, but you might want to get something stronger. I just nodded, my eyes still on Karen. She was in the back of one of the SUVs now, her head whipping around like she was trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. She thought she was just flexing HOA power. She thought she was untouchable. But now, she was finding out that the rules she loved to throw at everyone else meant nothing when you crossed the wrong line. And she'd crossed it in the loudest, most spectacular way possible. The SUVs didn't speed off right away. They sat there in my driveway with engines running, agents moving in and out like a small storm had settled over the block. Neighbors started to peek out from behind curtains and screen doors. You could feel the curiosity radiating down the street. A few even stepped outside, pretending to check their mail just so they could get a better look. Karen, still in the back seat of one SUV, kept leaning forward, trying to talk to whoever was in the driver's seat. I couldn't hear her words, but her hands were moving fast, like she was trying to argue her way out of quicksand. The agents weren't giving her much attention. They had bigger things to focus on. One agent approached me, flipping open a small notepad. We're going to need your statement for the report. Walk me through exactly what happened from the moment you saw her at the garage. I told him everything. The bolt cutters. The smug grin. Her claim that the HOA had voted to have the Jeep removed. How she blocked me from going into my own garage. I explained that I'd already shown her documentation about the Jeep's federal status, but she dismissed it like a joke. The agent scribbled notes quickly, nodding. Yeah, that tracks. We've seen situations like this before, people thinking HOA rules override federal law. I glanced toward the SUV holding Karen. So, what happens now? He gave a short shrug. Depends. Theft of federal property is a serious charge. The fact that she physically broke into a secured garage? That adds to it. The DA might push for felony charges. Either way, she's not walking away from this without a fight in court. While we talked, another agent went over the Jeep, checking the VIN, snapping photos, inspecting the lock mechanism on the garage door. Every move was methodical, like they were building a case brick by brick. I could feel the eyes of the entire neighborhood on me now. 2 doors down, A man in a baseball cap whispered something to his wife, both of them staring openly. Across the street, Mrs. Jensen, who'd lived here for 30 years, leaned against her porch railing with a grin so wide it was almost cartoonish. She'd had her own battles with Karen before. Finally, one of the agents closed his folder and signaled to the others. The SUV started to reposition. The tow truck driver, who had been standing awkwardly near his rig, stepped forward. So, you guys don't need me? An agent shook his head. Not unless you want to be an accessory to federal theft. The driver let out a breath of relief that was almost a laugh. Nope. I'm good. I'm leaving before she tries to drag me back into this mess. He climbed into his truck and rumbled away, shaking his head. I walked over to the garage and picked up the broken lock. It felt heavier now, not because of the weight but because of what it meant. That simple chunk of metal had been the barrier between my work and a disaster that could have gone a lot further if she'd gotten away with it. Karen caught sight of me holding it and started yelling something from inside the SUV. I still couldn't make out the words, but her tone was sharp and frantic. She was realizing, piece by piece, that this wasn't going to be solved with an HOA meeting or a strongly worded letter. This was bigger than her. Much bigger. One of the agents gestured toward her. She's still claiming she had HOA authorization to remove the vehicle. I almost laughed. Let me guess, she's saying that's a valid defense? The agent gave a small smirk. We've heard stranger. But no, it won't help her. This isn't HOA territory anymore. They closed the SUV door, cutting off her muffled protests. The neighborhood was almost completely silent now except for the low hum of the engines. It was strange. Just minutes ago, I was the one being told I'd face consequences. Now she was the one sitting in the back seat of a federal vehicle, surrounded by people with badges and authority she couldn't control. One of the agents handed me a card. If she, or anyone from the HOA, tries to retaliate, call us directly. Don't bother with the local police. We'll handle it. I slipped it into my pocket. My eyes wandered over to the cluster of neighbors still watching. I could only imagine the stories that would start flying around before the end of the day. Karen had ruled this place with threats of fines and letters for years. Now she was being driven away under suspicion of a federal crime. As the SUV started to pull away, I caught one last glimpse of her face through the tinted glass. It wasn't angry anymore. It was pale. Tight. Like she'd just realized the hole she dug for herself had no ladder. The engines roared a little louder as they reached the corner, turning out of sight. The street slowly returned to its normal stillness, but it didn't feel the same. Everyone had just watched the untouchable HOA president get taken away. And everyone knew things would never go back to the way they were before. By the time the SUVs were gone, the neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. People didn't rush back inside. They lingered. You could almost hear the unspoken conversations floating in the air, questions, rumors, and a hint of satisfaction from the ones who'd been on the receiving end of Karen's petty power plays before. I stepped back into my garage, running my hand along the Jeep's fender. It was still there, still solid, still mine. But the sight of that broken lock lying on the concrete made my stomach twist. I'd dealt with pushy HOA demands before, but nothing like this. Cutting a lock wasn't a complaint. It wasn't even a fine. It was an open act of defiance and stupidity. I replayed the morning in my head. The smug look on her face when she thought she was winning. The way she waved the tow truck driver toward the Jeep like she was giving some kind of royal decree. The confidence that came from years of bossing people around in the name of neighborhood standards. She'd been so sure she was untouchable. That was the thing about Karen, she didn't just follow the rules. She believed she was the rules. And when you believe that, you don't think twice before swinging bolt cutters into someone else's property. I picked up the lock, turning it over in my hand. It was thick, solid steel, the kind you don't break without effort. She hadn't just happened to do this. She'd planned it. She'd gone out, gotten the cutters, and decided this was her mission for the day. Somewhere between locking my garage and sipping my coffee that morning, she'd made the leap from HOA president to full-on thief. The sound of footsteps pulled me from my thoughts. It was Mr. Thompson from next door, a quiet man who mostly kept to himself. He stood at the edge of my driveway, hands in his pockets. "Crazy morning, huh?" he said, his voice low. I gave a short laugh. "You could say that." He glanced toward the street, then back at me. "You know, she's been talking about that Jeep for weeks. Saying it ruined the look of the neighborhood." He made air quotes. "Guess she wasn't bluffing." "No," I said, shaking my head. "She wasn't bluffing. She was breaking the law." He let out a long whistle. "Well, I don't think she'll be bothering you again anytime soon." Maybe not. But I knew Karen. She was stubborn. Even if she was in the back of a federal SUV right now, I doubted she'd see herself as the villain in this story. In her mind, she was probably still the hero, protecting property values, defending the sacred HOA rules, and punishing the neighbor who dared defy her. As Mr. Thompson wandered back to his house, I started locking the garage again. This time, I added an extra layer of security, another lock heavier than the first. Call it insurance. But while I was doing it, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Hello. This is Agent Carter, a firm voice said on the other end. Just wanted to update you. We've processed the vehicle, confirmed its condition, and documented the damage to your garage. We'll need you to come down later this week to sign the official report. I told him I'd be there. Then I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since they drove away. So, is she in custody? There was a short pause. She's being held for questioning. Charges are being reviewed. But yes, she's not going anywhere for now. A strange mix of relief and disbelief washed over me. Relief that she couldn't immediately show up on my doorstep with another ridiculous claim. Disbelief that it had gotten to this point at all. We hung up and I stood there for a moment looking at the Jeep. The quiet hum of the neighborhood felt different now. Lighter somehow. Like a weight had been lifted. But I knew this wasn't over. The HOA was still out there. And if I knew anything about them, they'd be scrambling to figure out how to spin this in their favor. I could picture it already. An emergency meeting, whispered conversations about damage control, maybe even a letter to all residents warning them not to interfere with HOA enforcement. They'd try to make it sound like Karen's arrest was just a misunderstanding, something blown out of proportion. But the truth was sitting right here in my garage. The cut lock. The scuff marks where the tow truck had started to back in. The federal agent's business card in my pocket. And the memory of Karen's face as she realized she was in way over her head. I shut the garage door slowly, the sound of the metal rolling down echoing in the still air. Somewhere out there, Karen was probably pacing in a holding room demanding to speak to a lawyer. And back here, the neighborhood was already buzzing with the start of a story they'd be telling for years. By late afternoon, the neighborhood grapevine was in full bloom. I couldn't so much as take the trash out without catching the tail end of whispered conversations drifting over fences and hedges. People I'd barely exchanged 2 words with in months were suddenly making excuses to pass by my driveway. Their eyes would dart to the garage, to the new heavy-duty locks, then to me, like they were silently asking for confirmation of what they'd already heard. Mrs. Jensen from across the street was the boldest. She marched right up, clutching her little Pomeranian like a prop, and leaned in with a grin that could cut glass. "Is it true?" she asked in a low voice. "Did Karen really get taken away by the, feds?" I didn't give her much, just a shrug and a half-smile. Let's just say she picked the wrong garage. Her laugh was loud enough to make a few blinds twitch open down the street. "Oh, this is going to drive her crazy," she said. "She's always been so sure she was untouchable." Then, leaning in closer, she added, "I bet the board's already meeting to figure out how to cover their tracks." That part one didn't doubt. The HOA's leadership had a habit of closing ranks when one of their own crossed a line. It didn't matter how wrong they were, they'd wrap themselves in procedure and technicalities until the truth was buried under paperwork and doublespeak. I could almost picture it, a handful of them crammed into the board president's living room, clutching their binders of rules, their voices low and urgent. They'd be flipping through pages, pointing at bylaws, desperately searching for something, anything, that could be twisted into an excuse. And somewhere in that mix would be the panic about me. Not just because I'd called in the cavalry, but because I had the receipts, literally. Photos of the cut lock. Security camera footage. The names and badge numbers of every agent who'd rolled up in those SUVs. I knew they'd hate that. The phone call started next. Not from the HOA directly, they were too careful for that, but from neighbors who were just checking in. One man, a guy from down the block I'd spoken to maybe twice, said, "Hey, just wondering if you plan to, press charges?" His tone was casual, but his words were loaded. I played it off. "That's really not up to me anymore." He hesitated. "Yeah, but if you didn't want to, maybe the whole thing could just fade away?" I could practically hear the board whispering in his ear. It was the same old HOA playbook. Send out the friendlier faces first, see if they can smooth things over before the real trouble starts. But this wasn't something they could sand down with fake apologies and neighborly small talk. They weren't dealing with a noise complaint or a trash can violation. They were dealing with the theft of a federal vehicle. By early evening, I got my first official letter slipped under my door. No envelope, no postage, just a folded piece of paper with the HOA's logo at the top. The wording was polished, but the meaning was clear. The HOA regrets any misunderstandings that may have arisen earlier today. We ask all parties to remain calm and allow the board to handle this matter internally in accordance with community bylaws. It almost made me laugh. Internally, like they could tuck this entire disaster into a filing cabinet and hope it disappeared. I left the letter on the kitchen counter without even opening it fully. There was nothing in there that could undo the fact that federal agents had swarmed my driveway less than 12 hours ago. The truth was, I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need their explanations. What I needed was for them to understand, this wasn't their arena anymore. They pushed too far and now they were out of their depth. The sun was setting when I heard another knock. This one wasn't from a curious neighbor. Standing there was a man in a crisp polo shirt, clipboard in hand, the kind of uniform casual you only see on people who think they have authority. "I'm here on behalf of the HOA, he said. "We'd like to discuss a resolution." I leaned against the doorframe. "Funny," I said. "I was just thinking the same thing." He smiled like he thought we were on the same team. "Great. So if we can just agree that today's events were a misunderstanding." I cut him off. "No. Today's events were a crime. And I think you know that." The smile froze on his face. His eyes flicked down to his clipboard, then back to me. "Well, perhaps we should schedule a meeting." I almost told him not to bother. But something in me wanted to see how far they'd try to spin this. If nothing else, it would be interesting to watch them squirm. So I just said, "Sure. Let's schedule a meeting." And as he walked away, I could see his shoulders tighten, like he'd just realized this wasn't going to be the quick fix he'd been sent to deliver. The meeting was set for the following evening, held in the community clubhouse that usually played host to baby showers, birthday parties, and the occasional awkward holiday potluck. This time, though, the air was heavier. You could feel it before you even stepped through the door. Inside, the board members were already seated at the long folding table up front, each with their neatly stacked papers and that practiced expression of authority they wore like a uniform. A few residents had trickled in too, pretending they were there out of civic duty, but everyone knew why they'd shown up. Karen's seat was empty, of course. No one had said her name yet, but her absence was louder than any opening statement. The board president, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat and began in that carefully measured tone HOA officials use when they're trying to control a wildfire with a garden hose. "As you all know," he said, "there was an incident yesterday involving one of our residents and a vehicle. We'd like to address it directly and provide some clarity." Clarity. That was rich. He went on about miscommunications and misunderstandings, carefully avoiding words like theft or arrest. His version of events painted it as a procedural mix-up, Karen acting on what she believed were valid HOA rules, me being concerned about the removal of my vehicle, and the matter, unfortunately, escalating. Every word was designed to sand the edges off reality. But the truth was sitting like a storm cloud over the room, and everyone knew it. When he finally opened the floor for comments, a hand shot up in the back. It was Mrs. Jensen, the grin still tucked in the corner of her mouth. "So," she said, "are we just going to pretend we didn't all see federal agents here yesterday?" The room rippled with muffled laughter and a few nods. The president tightened his lips. The presence of law enforcement was part of the escalation I mentioned. Mrs. Jensen wasn't letting up. "And Karen? Where is she?" A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "She's unavailable at the moment." Translation: she's still in custody. The murmurs grew louder. Another neighbor chimed in, "If she acted on behalf of the HOA, doesn't that make the HOA responsible?" That question hung in the air like a lead weight. The board members shifted in their seats. The president adjusted his glasses. "We're reviewing the circumstances internally." That was my cue. I stood, slow enough to make every eye in the room turn toward me. "Let's not sugarcoat this," I said. "Karen broke into my garage. She cut my lock. She tried to have my vehicle towed. That vehicle is federal property. She committed a crime. The only reason she's not here is because she's answering to the people who actually have the authority to deal with her." The room went still. Even the board members avoided my gaze. One of them, a woman with a tight bun and an even tighter smile, finally spoke. "We understand you're upset. But perhaps this could have been handled without involving federal authorities." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "She stole federal property. I didn't involve anyone. That's their jurisdiction. They showed up because that's their job." Someone in the back clapped. Just once. It was enough to break the tension, and a few others joined in, their approval cautious but clear. The president tried to regain control. All right, let's keep this constructive. Moving forward, we'll be revisiting vehicle compliance policies to ensure. I cut him off. Moving forward? You need to make sure your board members know they can't override the law. HOA rules don't give anyone the right to break into private property. Silence again. He glanced at the rest of the board, but no one offered to jump in. Finally, he muttered, "Duly noted." The meeting limped along after that, filled with filler topics about landscaping budgets and pool maintenance. But the energy had shifted. The authority the board usually commanded wasn't there anymore. The residents weren't leaning forward to nod along. They were sitting back, arms crossed, watching their so-called leaders squirm. When it wrapped up, I didn't linger. People stopped me on my way out, some to thank me for speaking up, others just to whisper their own run-ins with Karen over the years. Each story was a different flavor of the same thing: intimidation, manipulation, and a complete disregard for anyone else's rights. Outside, the air felt cooler, lighter. Streetlights buzzed overhead. I could still hear voices drifting out from the clubhouse. Board members huddled in a corner, talking fast and low. They were already strategizing, already trying to figure out how to patch the cracks before the whole facade collapsed. As I walked home, I glanced toward Karen's house. The driveway was empty. Curtains drawn. No movement inside. For years, she'd been the loudest presence in the neighborhood. Now she'd gone silent, and that silence was speaking volumes. The next morning started quietly, but it didn't stay that way for long. By mid-morning, there was a knock at my door, not the polite kind, but the kind that carried a certain urgency. I opened it to find two men in plain clothes, badges clipped to their belts. They weren't here for small talk. "Morning," the taller one said. "Mind if we come in for a few minutes?" I stepped aside, and they walked in with the easy confidence of people used to stepping into other people's homes. They didn't waste time. "We just wanted to follow up on yesterday. Karen's been interviewed and, let's just say, she's sticking to her story." I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, she still thinks she was in the right?" The shorter agent gave a dry chuckle. "Oh, she's convinced. Claims she was enforcing HOA regulations, acting in the interest of the neighborhood. According to her, you were the one who was out of line." I couldn't help but laugh. "So now cutting someone's lock and stealing a federal vehicle is community service?" "Apparently," he said, "in her mind, yes." He glanced around my living room, then back at me. "Thing is, the HOA might try to lean into that angle. If they can frame it as an overzealous but well-intentioned action, they'll try to shield her from the worst of it." I knew exactly what that meant. Spin control. They weren't going to win in a courtroom, but they might be able to muddy the water enough to keep her from being fully held accountable. The taller agent leaned forward. "We're going to need you to keep every scrap of documentation you have, photos, video, even the broken lock. This isn't just about her anymore. It's about whether the HOA as an organization encouraged her actions." That caught my attention. "You think they did?" He shrugged. "We've seen it before. Sometimes it's explicit. Sometimes it's just a wink and a nod. Either way, if they pushed her, that's important." After they left, I sat there thinking about it. Karen was reckless, but she wasn't stupid enough to believe she could just walk into someone's garage and take their vehicle without some kind of perceived backup. My gut told me she'd either gotten a quiet green light from the board or convinced herself she had one. And in this neighborhood, those two things were almost the same. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk. Not because I needed fresh air, but because I wanted to see the lay of the land. It didn't take long to notice the shift. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact were suddenly friendlier, giving small nods or quick greetings. Others looked away faster than ever, clearly not wanting to be dragged into anything. When I passed the clubhouse, I noticed the blinds were half drawn. Inside, I could see 3 board members sitting around a table, heads bent in intense conversation. Papers were spread out in front of them. It looked less like a routine HOA meeting and more like a war council. As I kept walking, I ran into Mr. Thompson again. He had that same quiet look he'd had the day before, but this time he spoke before I could. "Word is they're planning to send out some kind of official statement. My guess? They'll call it a misunderstanding and promise better communication going forward." I smirked. "Yeah, because that fixes everything." He chuckled softly. "Don't expect an apology. Not their style." That evening the statement came. It wasn't in an envelope this time, it was emailed to every resident. The subject line read, "Regarding recent events." It was everything I'd expected and nothing I respected. Long paragraphs about community values and mutual respect, vague assurances that the board was reviewing its internal policies, and of course, a reminder that all residents were expected to comply with HOA rules at all times. Not one word about Karen's arrest. Not one acknowledgement that she'd broken into my garage. They were already rewriting history. The problem was the neighborhood had seen too much. You couldn't unsee black SUVs in a quiet cul-de-sac. You couldn't forget the sight of Karen in the back seat of one, looking pale and small. People talked. People remembered. As the sun dipped low, I stood in my driveway watching the streetlights blink on one by one. My Jeep sat locked behind a reinforced door now, the metal gleaming faintly in the last traces of daylight. Somewhere down the street, Karen's house was still dark. No cars in the driveway. No movement behind the windows. For someone who used to patrol the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff, her sudden disappearance was like a missing puzzle piece everyone kept staring at. The HOA could send all the statements they wanted. They could hold their closed-door meetings, shuffle papers, and hope the noise died down. But the truth had already rooted itself in the neighborhood, and once that happens, it's only a matter of time before it grows into something they can't control. 2 days later, I was in my garage tightening the last bolt on the new reinforced door latch when I heard the faint crunch of footsteps on my driveway. I turned and saw someone I didn't expect, Karen's husband. He stood there awkwardly, hands shoved deep into his pockets, shifting his weight like he wasn't sure if he should even be there. We'd barely spoken in the years they'd lived here, mostly because Karen never let him get a word in during any conversation. "Hey," he said quietly, almost like he was afraid someone might hear him. "Mind if I talk to you for a second?" I wiped my hands on a rag and nodded toward the sidewalk. "Sure. What's on your mind?" He glanced around before lowering his voice. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For all of this. I know you probably don't care what I think, but she went too far." It was strange hearing that from him, but I could see something in his eyes. Relief, maybe. Like the chaos had finally cracked the wall she'd built between him and everyone else. "I appreciate that," I said. "But sorry doesn't change the fact that she broke into my garage." "I know," he said quickly. "I told her it was a bad idea. I told her to just let it go, but she—" He trailed off, glancing toward their house. "She doesn't listen to me. She doesn't listen to anyone." There was a long pause before he added, "She thought she was helping the HOA. Thought she was making an example. Now, I don't even know what's going to happen." I didn't say much. It wasn't my job to comfort him, and honestly, part of me wondered if this sudden humility would disappear the second Karen came back. But I could tell he was caught in the middle, half defending her because he felt like he had to, half wishing she'd finally been stopped. When he left, I went back to my work, but the conversation lingered. If even her own husband was quietly admitting she'd crossed a line, then the foundation of her untouchable reputation was crumbling faster than I thought. That evening, I decided to take a walk around the block. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness you get before a storm. And the looks I was getting, they were different now. People weren't just curious, they were cautious. Some gave me quick nods like they were quietly rooting for me. Others avoided my eyes, maybe afraid that talking to me would land them on the HOA's bad side, if the HOA even had a side left to stand on. Halfway around the loop, I passed the clubhouse. The lights inside were on, blinds wide open this time. A small group of board members sat around a table, papers and laptops scattered everywhere. They weren't laughing, they weren't relaxed. They looked like people trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. When they noticed me, a couple of them stiffened. The board president gave me a tight nod but didn't wave. I could almost read the thought on his face, "We're not done with you yet." Later that night, an email hit my inbox. Not the usual HOA newsletter about lawn care reminders or pool hours. This one was addressed only to me. Mr. __. The HOA board requests a private meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution regarding recent events. We believe an agreement can be reached that will satisfy all parties and prevent unnecessary escalation. Mutually beneficial resolution. I stared at those words for a while. They didn't sound like an olive branch. They sounded like damage control wrapped in polite language. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I poured myself a drink and sat by the window watching the empty street. Karen's house was still dark, but now I wondered if she was back hiding inside. If she was, she hadn't made a move. No dramatic confrontations. No patrol walks. No flyers stuffed in mailboxes. Maybe the HOA thought they could put this genie back in the bottle by cutting a deal. Maybe they thought they could get me to stay quiet in exchange for some minor concession, reimbursement for the lock, maybe a written apology that danced around admitting fault. But as I sat there, I couldn't help thinking about what the agents had said, that this might go beyond Karen. That the HOA itself could be complicit. If I agreed to their mutually beneficial meeting, I'd be stepping into their arena. And they played dirty there. Still, part of me wanted to go. Not because I believed they could fix this, but because I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized I wasn't going to be bought off, bribed, or silenced. I closed the email and left it unanswered for the night. If they wanted me, they'd have to wait. The longer they waited, the more uncomfortable they'd get. And right now, discomfort was the one thing they deserved in full.